I'm always looking for ways to show my cat how much I love her. And with Fancy Feast gems, I can pamper her whenever I want with a savory gravy on top of a gourmet mousse pâté. The pyramid shape makes serving simple, so all I have to do is peel and plate to make mealtime feel extra fancy. And with 2 entrees in every pack, it's easy to turn every day into the extraordinary. Fancy Feast gems.
Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
Introducing Oakley Meta Vanguard, the new performance AI glasses designed for athletes with an action-ready ultra-wide camera, powerful open-ear speakers, and built-in Meta AI that syncs with your Garmin devices for real-time insights while you train. Take your performance to the next level with Oakley Meta Vanguard. Athletic intelligence is here. Learn more on meta.com.
Boxing is one of the oldest Olympic sports, dating back to 1904. But there was a real risk 2024 in Paris could have been its last. Fortunately, thanks to World Boxing, the new international federation, it will be on the programme in Los Angeles in 2028. I'm Michael.
And I'm John, and this is Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy. And the fact it's confirmed for Los Angeles is good news for the sport, for the 2028 hosts, the USA, who top the overall Olympic boxing medal table, and GB Boxing, who currently lie third overall, and apart from Paris 2024, have been used to winning handfuls of medals at every Summer Games.
And hello, thank you very much for having me, Michael and John. My name's Jason Glover. I'm the chair of GB Boxing. Looking forward to speaking with you today.
And not GB Boxing specifically, Jason, but boxing at an Olympic level. It's been through the mill, hasn't it, recently?
It has, and it's been, I think, a real challenge to get to where we've got to for a variety of reasons. I mean, if we start out by thinking about the heritage of boxing, it's been around in the Olympics pretty much since the start. I mean, 1904 it missed the first 2 Olympics, but it's been there pretty much ever since. And I think the other thing about boxing is that it's a bit of a leveler, unlike a lot of sports where I think there's a need to have a degree of investment. Boxing is one of those where I think anybody can do it, and you just got to look at the number of countries that participate in the sport. I think in Paris it was I think it was 68. I think in Tokyo it was 81. So you have very significant numbers of countries participating, and certainly to me, I felt it was very, very important that we did get boxing back on the roster, so to speak. So we may well explore it in a little bit, but GB Boxing, I think, deserves a lot of credit for actually making sure that boxing was there in LA. There's quite a lot that's been written about it. There's quite a lot that hasn't been written about it. I'm very willing to be open with you today and share some of the secrets of what went on.
Well, I was going to ask you what some of the secrets of what went on are. What's been the kind of potted history, the timeline of how we've got from where we were, where it looked like the sport was going to seriously disappear from the Olympics, to now being in what appears to be good shape?
Yeah, so I mean, the history, for the benefit of the audience, Rio was a competition which was mired in controversy. There are a number of disputed bouts. I think probably most famously the Michael Conlan bout, but there are others that were questionable as well, some that impacted GB boxers specifically. So as a result of that, and I think concerns that the IOC had with the boxing federation at the time, called AIBA at the time, AIBA. They changed their name to the IBA subsequently. Because of those concerns, the IOC, as you know, decided to take control of the boxing competition in Tokyo. And for the benefit of listeners, that's unusual. Normally what happens with the Olympics is it's the international federation that runs the activities for the particular sport. So the IOC did that really as I think they thought as a one-off, a huge undertaking on their part, and to their credit, I think they did a very good job, but it's less than ideal. They set out a number of parameters that they required the IBA to satisfy if they were to run the tournament in Paris, and the IBA failed to satisfy those, as we all know. So we were really faced in a position, I think it was 2022 or early 2023, where the IOC were making it pretty clear that boxing needed to sort itself out, and they had lost faith with the IBA, and boxing would effectively be taken off the program in LA unless people could come together and sort this out. You will appreciate that the position of the IBA was one that was really done with the with national federations actually seeing it happen and allowing it to happen. So I think it was very difficult to envisage changes happening from within. And so as a result of that, ourselves as GB Boxing and a very small number of nations came together to work out what we could do. And I think it's fair to say that ourselves really took the lead on that. I mean, I certainly don't want to detract from the great work that Boris van der Vorst did as the chair of the new body World Boxing, and also some financial support was provided by US Boxing. But the reality with it was that as GB Boxing, we put in the Secretary General, who was effectively on our payroll. So we effectively seconded Simon Toulson to get World Boxing set up. And subsequent to that, the first Congress, Matt Holt, my chief executive, became one of the three vice presidents. So we were really there at the start. I remember, my day job is as a lawyer. I remember sitting down and going through the statutes when we were setting up World Boxing, trying to make them as secure as one could possibly make them. And so there's a lot of work we did behind the scenes. And look, we're now in a position where World Boxing almost appears as if it's been there forever. We've got over 120 nations. But at the start, it was very difficult. I think we had 9 original signatories, and it was a very, very slow burn. And I think it's also fair to say that the establishment of World Boxing and our dissociation with the IBA came at a cost. It certainly came at a cost to our boxers, I think, in Paris, in that we effectively withdrew from IBA competitions. Our boxers were unable to participate in either the World Championships or the European Championships from 2022. And without seeking to make too many excuses, I think that was a significant contributory factor to some of our lack of success that we had in Paris.
We'll talk about Paris in a moment, Jason, but just on that, do you think when the Olympics after Paris really were clear that this was not going to be happening if World Boxing effectively wasn't appointed by the rest of the federations, it really focused the mind? Because after Paris, you mentioned there GB Boxing led the way by being a member of World Boxing, but suddenly everybody did then sign up. There was that focus of mind.
It may well have appeared that way, but I mean, if you actually look at what happened, it was a very iterative process. If you actually go back and look at press releases that World Boxing put out, it would be 2 or 3 members here, 2 or 3 members there. We were still subscale this time last year, if I remember correctly. The reality of it is that the IOC, in order to recognize World Boxing as an international federation, wanted both quantity in numbers of nations. There was talk of somewhere between 50 and 70 nations before that effectively World Boxing could potentially be recognized. That was sort of the steer that we'd got. But also geographic coverage as well. The IOC prides itself on the geographers in the 5 continents. And so it wasn't a case of being able to do this by just having a cabal of European nations who think the same way. We really needed to engage across the globe. And, that took a lot of effort. And Boris van der Vorst deserves huge amount of credit for that in terms of it. But I do want to also make the point to the question you raised, John. the engagement of GB Boxing went way beyond just being a signatory. Putting in the Secretary General, putting in the Vice President, providing funding, and also remember, we were pretty critical in terms of getting the credibility of the organisation started. We hosted, I think, pretty much the first event that World Boxing had, the World Boxing Cup. We were the first host of the World Boxing Championships, the end of year championships at the end of 2024. And we were the first hosts of the World Championships, which just took place last month. And it's very easy, I think, in retrospect to think, well, big deal. But we had to make those financial commitments at a point in time where World Boxing didn't have a secure future, didn't have a secure economic future. So we were really bidding, and paying for something that might actually not happen. So I do think GB Boxing deserves a lot of praise and support. And it would be remiss of me not to extend that recognition to UK Sport. UK Sport did a fantastic job. They've been unbelievably supportive of our predicament, unbelievably supportive in terms of helping us and supporting us with, in particular, with the World Championships, but throughout the journey.
And you mentioned those World Championships in Liverpool. How proud are you that it happened and that you staged it? And is it the beginning of the journey rather than the end?
Yes, I mean, we were very proud of it. The feedback we've had has been excellent. We'd have liked to have more people there. I don't know if either you or Michael got up there, but I went up there for a few days, thought it was excellent. Liverpool did a fantastic job in terms of putting it on. The feedback that we had from the nations, I think there were 70 plus nations there, was uniformly very, very positive. So I think as a showcase for Great Britain, it was great. And I think as a showcase for World Boxing, it was great. But to the second part of your question, of course, it's just the start of the journey. We were fortunate enough to secure 4 medals. We had 1 silver, 3 bronze, and that compares very favourably to the previous 2 cycles. I think the 2017 World Championships, remember in those days it was split, men's was separate to the women's, but I think we picked up a total of 2 medals. And then in 2021, I think it was 1 medal. So to collect 4 medals was very, very positive. But of course, it's early stages. And I think we're very pleased it is early stages. Without asking myself questions, that's your job. But if you were to ask me the question, would I sort of take that in 3 years' time for the Olympics? We do need to remember there are a broader set of weights for the World Championship than there are at the Olympics. We secured effectively two medals at Olympic weights. Would I take 2 medals now? No, I think this is a fantastic crop of young boxers that we have who are really just starting their journey. And you will both appreciate, and hopefully the audience does, boxing's relatively unique. In fact, it may be completely unique in terms of every single cycle we have to start again. So when the Olympics happen, pretty much every boxer turns professional. So I think in terms of the past 36 boxers we've had at the previous 4 Olympics, only 4 of those boxers competed in 2 Olympics. And guess what? 3 of them medaled. So the challenge we have is when we don't have that recycling, for want of a better word, it creates a lot of challenges. So we're starting with a brand new squad, brand new team. Great. There's a great culture amongst that team, very supportive of each other. And we were as delighted, in fact, by the performance of the boxers who didn't medal as those that did. We set very much as an objective for that tournament that we should try and secure as many second or third bouts for our boxers as possible. And pretty much everybody fought at least twice, if not 3 times. So it was very successful, but it's early days.
Now, as we often do on this podcast, we surf your LinkedIn profile or read your bio on your website. So we're speaking to the chair of GB Boxing, Jason Glover. He's also, as he said, the London managing partner of Simpson Thacher, one of the world's preeminent law firms. Has been named Global Private Funds Lawyer of the Year a record 8 times, and oversees a business of over 200 lawyers generating around about $400 million per annum. So I have to ask you the question, Jason, where do you get the time and indeed the appetite to get involved with, if you'll excuse the pun, the fights that you've had to get involved with to get GB boxing and world boxing where it is today, seemingly in rude health after Liverpool?
Well, it's a great question, Michael. I mean, first of all, I'm very privileged to have a supportive family who I think over the years have seen very little of me. And the reality of it is that the experience with boxing, at least historically, has been on a 6 or 7 day working basis. I always remember reading. I'm a complete sports nut, and I always remember reading a fantastic book by Tony O'Reilly, who was the great rugby player for Ireland and the British Lions. And again, for the listeners, he was someone who I think one could really admire. During the week he ran Heinz in the US, a huge business, but at the weekends he had a separate interest, which was running, I think it was the Irish Independent. It was one of the big newspapers in Ireland, and he was challenged by his board one day about, was he committed to Heinz? He was doing this stuff at weekends. And he responded by saying, listen, most CEOs play golf at the weekend. I just run a separate business. And I think I took that as a very good way of looking at boxing. It was one of those things that I was determined it wouldn't interfere with the working career, but it was one of those things I would just fit in spare time. So the sacrifice really was made by my family as much as anything. But also, I should say, I'm very, very fortunate. I'm surrounded by really high quality members of staff, particularly at a senior level, and they've been there for a very long time. So Matt Holt, who is the chief executive, he's been in place for 17 years. I don't want to overplay his strengths because I'm sure there'll be other national governing bodies listening, but I think he probably must be the best chief executive there is out there of a national governing body. So he makes my life very, very easy. And sometimes I have to say I feel a bit of a spare part. He just seems to be able to know what we should be doing, and he's 2 steps ahead. And then we're incredibly fortunate to have Rob McCracken, who's been our performance director for 16 years. So we have huge stability at a senior level. One final thing I'd say is that, I knew what I was letting myself in for, because I originally got involved with GB Boxing back in 2009, was a director for 8 years. As part of the role that I had in 2009, I put in place articles which really were trying to be based around good corporate governance principles. So put in place a system where you couldn't stay on the board for more than 8 years without then having to take 4 years off. And I guess I became a victim of my own my own rules. So I stepped away in 2017, but then was very fortunate then to be invited back in 2021 to apply for the position. So I guess it was a known quantity for me as well. And I have to say, knowing that Matt and Rob were at the helm did make life a lot easier in terms of making that decision.
Be honest, you're a lawyer, so you have to be. Since becoming chair, has it actually been bigger and more involved and taken up more time than perhaps you anticipated?
It has. I think what's really surprised me about it is there's always something going on. Look, the world boxing thing has taken up huge amounts of time, and still to this day does. There's still things going on there in terms of getting it anchored and settled. So there's always something going on. I say to my friends that it's sort of a half a day a week role, but that probably is an underestimate. It is probably a day a week, but I'm very conscious there are other chairs of sports who will be spending longer on it than me. As I say, I think I'm very fortunate that I have a very strong team around me, and I think it's also fair to say the role of the chair, people tend to adopt different roles. In the past, when GB Boxing was originally formed, we had a great chair called Derek Mapp, but he really took on an executive chair role. And I think you have to make that decision early on. Do you want to be an executive chair and roll your sleeves up and be involved in everything? Or are you really going to be there to support the chief executive and the performance director and help and advise and coach and mentor? And I very much see myself as adopting the latter role.
Well, you've kind of explained there, Jason, what a chair does, or what you see as your role as the chair. And you mentioned Matthew Holt, the chief executive. What are his strengths then? Why is he so good? You don't have to promote him too much, but why is he so good?
Well, I mean, first of all, he's always over the detail. I think your concern as a chair is making sure that every scratch has been itched. You've looked at everything, and you've looked at it multiple times. So he's over all of the detail, which I think is a really key skill. I think he has a lot of empathy, and you see that really with the relationship he has with his staff, but also with the boxers. He's very dedicated. He works incredibly hard. I think most importantly, he really has the interests of the sport top of his mind. So he wants the sport to succeed, and he wants the GB boxers within that to succeed. So I think he brings a huge number of qualities to the table. I mean, I have to say, I feel very privileged to have him, and I'm just very, very pleased that Liverpool Football Club haven't reached out to him to become his chief executive, because I know if that opportunity came along, I would lose him. But I'm hoping that that's the only thing that would appeal to him.
We're talking to Jason Glover, chair of GB Boxing, on Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy.
Experience a membership that backs your business journey with American Express Business Platinum. When you pay with membership rewards points for all or part of an eligible flight booked with a qualifying airline through Amex Travel, you can get 35% of those points back, up to 1 million points back per calendar year. American Express Business Platinum. There's nothing like it. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum.
GB Boxing was set up in October 2008 now, to effectively ensure that Great Britain has the best possible team for the Olympic Games. But Jason, as your role, and I think you have a couple of members from Boxing Scotland and Welsh Boxing on your board. How does it work with the home nations? Because they're really integral to how boxing works in this country as well.
It's a very good point you make, John. And, you know, we're unlike a lot of sports. There are some other sports that have a similar structure to us. So just to explain to the listeners, the reality is that grassroots boxing is controlled by the home nation. So England, Scotland and Wales. Just for everyone's benefit, Northern Ireland is part of Ireland for the purposes of boxing. So we don't have Northern Ireland engaged with us. And so the functionality of GB boxing really is one particular thing, which is winning Olympic medals. So it does differ from a lot of other sports where they have to think about grassroots and the whole promotion of the sport. So, you know, we're very reliant upon the home nations. We're reliant upon them in terms of looking after the sport's interests, safeguarding, investing in clubs, etc. I think we've been very fortunate that we have a strong group of home nations. I'm very fortunate that I have very good relations with each of the chairs of those home nations. There is, fortunately, a good alignment of interest. I think that the home nations would recognise that success at the level of Great Britain brings people into the clubs. So that's clearly a positive. The challenges, I think, with the relationship tend to emanate really around the pathway program and ensuring that GB boxing has access to the boxers at the appropriate time. You know, I feel for clubs in some respects, they bring these boxers up, train them, etc. And then you'll have England potentially taking over, or Scotland or Wales, and then Great Britain takes over. And I think that can sometimes be a source of contention around the timing of that and making sure that we've made the right decisions. And it's not unusual to see at World Championships or European Championships, home nation boxers winning medals who actually aren't on the GB programme. So we don't get it right all the time. But I think we get it right a lot of the time. And as I say, the home nations are critical to us. They also, I think, make my job a little bit easier in the sense that I don't have to worry about issues that go with grassroots boxing. Well, in the sense, I obviously do worry about them, but there's nothing I can do about them. So it does make the role a little bit more manageable.
Talking of home nations and the boxing, and you may defer this question to your other chairs, as you said, in Boxing Scotland, Welsh Boxing, England Boxing, but where are we with the Commonwealth Games and boxing at the minute? Because when the sport programme came out, there was lots of detail around 9 sports, and then against boxing, there was an asterisk and a TBC. Can we fill any of that in now?
Well, I may be speaking out of turn, but what I know is that obviously boxing is on the program, number one. Number two, I think that the TBC was very much, my understanding was based around athlete participation, how many athletes would participate, and how many weight categories we would potentially have. All credit to World Boxing, but my understanding is there is a desire to create conformity around the Commonwealth Games with the Olympics, and so having consistency of weights, and I think that is quite important. So my understanding is that for the Commonwealth Games, we should expect the Olympic weight categories and no more. I think the other challenge, as I understand it, is just that athlete participation, and we're at an early stage in the run up to that, and of course. Knowing how many athletes will participate is always a challenge. We had that at the World Boxing Championships. An interesting story on this. We had budgeted for 500 to 550 athletes. 3 months before, we were expecting potentially up to 800. And that creates a huge strain on the system. Just practical things like how can you possibly accommodate all those bouts within a fixed window? How can you put people up in terms of accommodation? So dare I say it, I suspect that we will have those types of issues that the organising committee for Glasgow are having to contend with. So it wouldn't surprise me if we still see a few TBCs running quite close to the games. It's amazing how many boxers will drop out near the time. And of course, think about it from the perspective of the national federations around the world. Why wouldn't you just create optionality? If you're going to be asked by the organising committee, how many boxers do you think you're going to send at this point in time? You're probably going to say it's a full roster, even though you know full well it isn't going to be.
And I know you said that you weren't necessarily directly involved with grassroots boxing because you're the chair of GB Boxing. That's the world-class programme, the performance programme. But it is such an important grassroots sport. You must obviously understand and recognise that in these boxing clubs, these local boxing clubs, grassroots boxing clubs, that's where the likes of Lewis Richardson are coming from. And unlike British sailing, for example, you don't need a skiff. You can go along, they'll lace your gloves up, put you in the ring, and you can get on with it. And for so many young people, that is so important for physical, mental well-being and all those other things that we know are so important right now.
Yes, I mean, it was the thing that attracted me to the role in the first place. I mean, I do have a love of boxing, but I think for me, there was a higher purpose with this. I do recognise that appealing to a younger demographic, and also a demographic that's often inner cities where there are limited opportunities for sports, I think is very, very important. I think the other thing to say to the audience as well is that the speed in which people can go from beginner to actually Olympic athlete can be very quick. I mean, Anthony Joshua is a great example of that. I think it was literally 3 or 4 years between just going into a club and being an Olympic champion. So yes, the grassroots is very, very important. And it was the reason, probably the primary reason why ensuring that boxing was on the program in LA was so important to me, because I'm very conscious that amateur boxing really only has a window for 2 weeks every 4 years. Sadly, we had very limited coverage of the World Boxing Championships. I mean, you can get me on that theme, and I'll not particularly happy with the BBC, for instance, who we really sought to try and engage with and who were not engaged with us. So that was unfortunate. So I'm very conscious that you have a very limited period in which to appeal, and it really is at the Olympics. But that's really where I think we tend to appeal to grassroots, and people see the Olympics and say, I want to have a go at that.
Well, let's talk about the BBC. You've opened the door. Jason. Let's walk through it. Look, I'll play devil's advocate slightly. They're in a position where they have to appeal to a mass audience. They get funded by every single person who has a TV license. They have to appeal to a mass audience. But what is your issue with them for not covering the boxing? Which, and again, I'm not saying that I agree with their decision, but for me, I would see a male and female sport that is something that they would want to promote, etc. But what is your issue with them?
Well, first of all, they're not set up to appeal to a mass audience. They're a public service. So we need to remember that first and foremost. So in the context of being a public service, first of all, we have a World Championships taking place in the UK. That is unusual and I think should be promoted. Secondly, we have a sport where there are a lot of human interest elements to this. Our boxers are not just faces. They all have stories behind them, very, very interesting stories. And we did seek to promote that side of things. So I think that there's a lot there, that could appeal to an audience. It's not going to be an audience that's going to bring in 10 million viewers at all. But I think it is going to bring in a significant number of viewers in a demographic again that I'm not sure would necessarily appeal. The BBC wouldn't always necessarily appeal to. And I think my biggest grievance that I have with it is not that the BBC doesn't support coverage of boxing, but at the same time we had the Canelo Crawford fight, and if you go on the web pages, you'll have seen lots of coverage of Canelo Crawford, but no mention really of the World Boxing Championships taking place. I think the first mention, the tournament started, I think, on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. The first mention that I think appeared, despite the work of our fantastic PR guy Lee Murgatroyd, was I think on the following Friday. So we were like 9 or 10 days into competition. So I think that was a shame. And look, I'm sure there are reasons for it, but I would like to sort of sit down and explore them. As I say, I think the BBC, to my mind, it's a public service as well as anything else, and I think it was just unfortunate that we didn't get coverage in spite of the efforts we'd made.
Does seem slightly strange they're trying to get professional boxing back on the BBC when, as you say, there was a 3-week tournament that they could have hosted, but they're obsessed by football, aren't they? Let's be honest.
Well, yeah, I mean, we know that, and we have to recognise that people want to watch that, and so fair enough. But I mean, it's not as if there isn't capacity to stream this stuff in other ways, or to do a highlights program or whatever. I think to me, it's not just a choice of the big 5 sports and then deciding not to do anything else. I think that you can accommodate lots of people, and we should remember there are a lot of people who do box at grassroots. It's not as if it's a sport that's under the radar that people aren't aware of. And as I say, I think the human interest side of this, there were some great stories. There was a lot of coverage of Cindy at the Paris Olympics. I think it was a great story. And there are other stories out there that I think are frankly inspiring to the youth. And it's those sorts of things that I would encourage the BBC or indeed any other broadcaster to look at and to cover.
I'm not going to play devil's advocate. I'm going to nail my colours firmly to the mast. And when you say, we know that this isn't going to bring a 10 million audience, I think the point is that when we get round to the next Olympics and you've got a British boxer in an Olympic final going for a gold medal, we are going to get the 10 million audience. And the issue is we haven't had the storytelling up to that point.
I totally agree with you. I think a lot of this is developing the backstory. If we think about Keely Hodgkinson, Keely's story, a fantastic story, but the BBC have pursued that from pretty much day one, and they do. They've got great experience of seeing up and coming athletes and seeing them throughout their journey. But I think with boxing, we've been denied that time and again, and I think the sport struggles as a result. So, to think about, say, Lewis Richardson at Paris, people wouldn't have been aware of him until then. And Look, it's not just boxing. We can pick any number of sports where this happens. I'm not saying boxing is a sole victim, but I do think that the human interest side is the bit that really would appeal to the audience, and there are some great stories to tell.
Is this, building on that, an issue then that vexes you and your other chairs? Because we've just had this World Championship season in Olympic sport. We've had a rowing World Championships, a canoe slalom World Championships. We've got an artistic gymnastics World Championships that's starting. Yes, we saw the World Athletics Championships on our television screens, but so much of this Olympic and Paralympic sport hasn't got the coverage that perhaps it deserves.
I think that's right. I can't speak for the other sports, but what I do know is that there was a high degree of frustration amongst the boxers themselves that there was no coverage. So this isn't just a chair who's removed from it all, just having a moan. This is impacting on the boxers themselves. That they are at the top of their sport, and are getting no coverage. And I don't think it doesn't take much to actually imagine what that's like. So, you're Chantal Reed. I'm not saying Chantal said anything, but I'm just hypothesizing. Chantal Reed gets the first medal, I think if I remember correctly, on the Wednesday of the tournament. No coverage at all. How does that make you feel if you're Chantal? I mean, I wouldn't be at all surprised if she felt it diminished the extent of her achievement. So this is something that is not abstract. It has an impact on the athletes themselves, and of course, it has an impact on society. Why would you choose to pursue a career as an amateur boxer if it's going to be done in the dark where there's no coverage?
I'd like to put it on the record that I totally agree with you. I was just trying to be fair and balanced. Just so everyone knows my position as well. I think it's an absolute disgrace, and I didn't really understand it. Let's finish, Jason, on a positive note. You talked about GB boxing. The journey is just really starting for LA, but those games will soon be here, won't they? We're going to be really excited for them.
They will. It comes about very, very quickly. We'll have qualifying tournaments in 2027. Almost certainly. So we're only really 2 years away from that.
Not on the BBC, can I just point out?
Well, hopefully we'll have attracted the BBC by then, and I haven't
Fingers crossed.
I have the BBC a lot to thank the BBC for. Probably my interest in boxing in the first place, from watching fights with Alan Minter and Maurice Hope and boxers like that, all came from the BBC. I mean, that just shows the coverage does have an impact. But yeah, I mean, LA will be with us before we know it. We've still got a lot of work to do. We're not resting on our laurels. We're really only 6 months into a 4-year cycle. And the pinnacle of that will obviously be July, August 2028. But there's a lot of work to do. We're working very hard at it. We're looking at what we can do better. You've been very kind and sort of not touched on Paris, but I think we should mention Paris. Paris was disappointing. There are reasons for it. It's a 3-year cycle. And dare I say it, that when you start with a new team, we benefited enormously with a 5-year cycle with Tokyo, and consequently got 6 months. We had 3 years for Paris. This time we've got 4 years, which is helpful. We've looked at the program and what we think we can do better. We've really sought to develop more of an individualized program. So it's involved a complete reshaping of how we bring training and coaching and support services to the boxers. So rather than thinking every boxer is the same, we're really looking at individual needs and individual performance targets, etc. So that's good. We continue to work on developing the pathway with the home nations. So at this point, I think we're in a good position, but it's a long way to go. And do you know what, John? It is such a competitive sport. There are so many nations competing. I'll get this wrong, but I think there was something like 38 nations. No, it wouldn't have been 38, but it was a very significant number of nations who won medals in Paris. There were only 3 nations who were top 10 in both Tokyo and Paris. It's highly, highly competitive. And we shouldn't forget that for a number of these nations, Cuba, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, etc., is pretty much the national sport. So we've got a tough task ahead. We're the underdog in all of this, but I remain very confident in our boxers and the program, and fingers crossed for LA.
Well, we can't wait to see the journey, and we'll definitely be following it over the next few years as well. Jason Glover, Chair of GB Boxing, thank you so much for talking to Great British Bosses.
Pleasure. Thank you.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.